Alright, so I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off right from the get-go, okay? Monsters exist. They are real. They are living in this world. You're gonna have to make your peace with that, alright? Monsters exist, and that's cool and everything. Like, they're not that big of a deal. Most of them just sorta keep to themselves, don't cause too much of a ruckus, and generally go about living fairly chill lives. They don't hurt anyone. But just like how every single regular human isn't super chill, every single monster also isn't super chill. And there's a few of them out there who can be pretty dangerous. But don't worry, that's where Graham and I come in. My name is Dallas Wood, and for the past 3 years, I've been hunting monsters with my best friend Graham Dalton. Although he and I have been working together to protect people for a lot longer than that. We grew up side by side, and he's the closest thing to a brother I've ever had. When we were 18, we both enlisted in the military to serve our country, although we never really saw any serious action. That all said, once we got out, we figured we had the training and the skills to still do some real good out there. And once we found out about the monsters and learned to recognize them, we figured that was the best place to apply ourselves. So we set to work, dealing with the problems that people don't know about in a way that's safe and effective. But with all that said, Graham and I can't be everywhere. The world is a big place, and there are a lot of monsters out there. So we got it in our heads that it might be a good idea to share some of our experiences and help you, yes you, maximize your chances of surviving an encounter with one of the more dangerous monsters out there. And I thought that there's no better place to start than by talking about sirens. You may have heard of sirens before, or you may not have. I'm pretty sure that they're from Greek mythology, but not every siren is actually Greek, and if you just assume that, they may get mad. That said, every siren is stunningly goddamn beautiful. Even the men. They're gorgeous. They generally range from cute girl / guy next door to actual supermodel. It's crazy. But you can't just assume every hot bod you see is actually a siren, because 9 times out of 10 they won't be, and spotting them isn't easy. The obvious physical traits aren't really out of the open. Their gills are located along the ribs, under the arms, and can literally just be covered by wearing a shirt. They've got sharpened teeth that you'd think would be fairly easy to spot, but unless you're really watching their teeth, you're probably not going to notice them. Chances are, unless you're a dentist with some weird fetish for teeth, your eyes are going to be on their more interesting assets, and you won't get a good look at those pearly whites until it's too late. So then, what is the dead giveaway? Aside from the gills you won't see and the teeth you won't notice? Well, I'll tell you, but you ain't gonna like it. It's in the eyes. Sirens have a certain look to their eyes. Their eyes are a little more reflective, sort of like a cat's eye. If you met one in the dark, you might just see that same glow in their eyes you'd see with a lot of animals with great night vision. But as with everything else, there's a little drawback to looking a siren straight in the eye. You look a siren in the eye, and you're likely to fall right under their spell. Eye contact is how they get you. I'm not a researcher or anything, so I really don't know exactly how their hypnosis works. Pretty sure I heard somewhere that it's a natural thing, like something about their eyes fucks with your brain and makes you more vulnerable to suggestion or something like that. But maybe it's just magic. I mean, other creatures use magic. Magic totally exists. So who knows? Either way, that's the most obvious giveaway that somebody is the siren, and if that's not very helpful, I completely understand. I'm in the same boat as you. But if it were that easy to pick them out of a crowd, nobody would be getting fed on. Right. I should probably mention that sirens drink human blood. Now, to be entirely fair, just because sirens drink blood doesn't make them inherently bad. Most of them are content with taking what they need and moving on. They don't kill you, they just sort of hypnotize you, get you alone, feed, and move on. Hell, considering how often they use seduction to get people alone, there's a good chance you'll get laid while they feed on you. And I'm actually told that it makes the sex better. My point is, there's usually no lasting damage to getting fed on by a siren, and in most cases where somebody dies, it's because they don't handle the hypnosis well, become convinced they're in love, and start seeking sirens out deliberately. In that case, they might die after being fed on too frequently, but those are usually accidents. Usually. Like I said before, just like how every single regular human isn't super chill, every single monster also isn't super chill. That applies to sirens too, and some of them are just complete fucking assholes. Alright, so I'm gonna walk you through one of our recent siren encounters and see if I can't educate you on how to properly deal with a siren encounter, should you wind up dealing with one. Comprende? Now I'll be upfront and say I ain't used to breaking things down like this, so don't be afraid to ask any questions if you've got them. My goal is to ensure you don't get fed on. I will also note that this encounter was something of a worst case scenario. Not every siren encounter is going to be this bad. But hey, it doesn't really hurt to have one of these worst case scenarios in mind, does it? Step 1. Don't look them in the eye. Alright. So Graham and I sort of knew what we were walking into with this one. We'd actually gotten the call a few days prior about a siren out in Montana, won't say where, by the name of Chrissy, who was suspected to be involved in a couple of recent deaths. Now, the organization we work for, the Fae Relations Bureau, usually doesn't bother with the odd death here and there since these things sort of happen. Yeah, I know that's horrible, but we don't have the manpower to police this kind of thing. However, when a trend starts popping up, somebody's gotta deal with it. We chatted with some of the locals and knew that Chrissy liked to frequent a few different bars in the county, so we'd spent the past couple of nights drinking there. Funnily enough, one of those bars was actually where we'd had our very first siren encounter. And it was the encounter that had turned us into the men we are today. About 5 or 6 years back, we'd been out on a fishing weekend at a nearby lake. We'd had a good evening out on the water and we'd hit up one of the local bars to booze and have some fun. Graham had been shooting some pool and I'd been watching the game when this one girl with long black hair walked up to me. She was sweet and we flirted for a bit. I remember that moment I'd looked into her eyes. I'd fallen head over heels for her. If you haven't already guessed, this lady was a siren. Anyways, we were talking and she had her hand on my leg and everything, and she was getting all touchy-feely and she asked me if I wanted to get out of here. Well, of course I said, yes ma'am. She led me outside and into the woods, and we'd started getting into it. A lot of kissing and whatnot. She had started taking off my shirt and kissing my neck. That was when I felt the teeth. Now, I was so deep under this girl's spell that I barely even noticed the pain. I mean, I did notice it, but I didn't really react. She'd been moaning and drinking down mouthful after mouthful of blood, and honestly, I'd still been pretty into it at the time. Then the next thing I knew, there was Graham, hooting and hollering, throwing that girl off of me, and screaming at her to get the hell away. She'd backed off and she bared her fangs at him, snarling like an angry possum. He'd still had a pool cue in his hand and started swinging it at her. He'd cracked it against her head, breaking the damn thing in two, and that's when she'd run off. Now, this whole time, I'd sort of been sitting against a tree, dazed and bleeding. Graham had helped me back to my truck and got me all cleaned up. I vaguely recall asking him why he'd just stopped me from getting laid, and he told me that one of the guys in the bar had seen me leave with a black-haired girl, and made a joke about it. Apparently, she had a bit of a reputation. Not as a bloodsucker, but as a pickpocket. I guess she liked to rob the guy she fed on too. Sure enough, when I looked for my wallet, it was missing. Bitch had nicked it. Graham was obviously a little more concerned about the fact that she'd been sucking my blood, and we'd gone after her the next day, although she never turned up. It was after that we started trying to make sense of what we'd seen that night, and eventually we ended up stumbling onto the FRB and joining its ranks. The rest from there is history. In our search for Chrissy, we actually visited that same bar. There was no Chrissy there, and apparently that black-haired girl had only been in once since the incident with us, during which she'd left empty-handed, but that was fine. We had time to search. It was a couple of days of bar hopping before we ran into Chrissy. We recognized her from a photograph our employers had provided, courtesy of another bar's security cameras. Guess they'd installed those after some of the patrons got too rowdy. She'd been sitting at the bar chatting up a bartender who looked sorta like he'd walked off the cover of a romance novel. Now, I know I said that most sirens are good-looking, and I'm sure that at some point Chrissy had also been good-looking, but damn. This was probably the ugliest siren I'd ever seen. To be fair, this wasn't a natural ugly. This was a fake ugly. Lip injections, bleach blonde hair, a spray-on tan, way too much makeup, and a leopard print miniskirt. This girl was going for what she probably thought looked hot, but just came off as trashy. And that's me saying that. I'm the first one to admit that I'm no Mr. Fancy Pants. But this girl looked like a trailer park Instagram Barbie. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have wanted to talk to her. But Graham and I are nothing but professional, and after losing a quick game of rock, paper, scissors, I agreed to be the bait. So after knocking back my beer, I moseyed on down to sit beside Chrissy and started chatting her up. There's a certain technique you learn while talking to sirens. You look anywhere but their eyes. You look at the nose, which looked like it had had work done on it. Or you look at the lips, in which case you might notice the teeth. But you just don't look at the eyes. Most sirens don't notice you doing this, and they just assume that if you aren't already under their spell, you will be soon. Step 2. Don't let them know you're onto them. Now, while talking to a siren like Chrissy, you've got to listen very carefully to what they say. She and I had been talking for a good 10 minutes or so, and she'd been going on and on like, "Yeah, I've been in this area for about 10 years now. I love it. It's so scenic. The forest is just lovely. It's nice to get away from it all, you know." And I just sort of nodded along to everything, making small talk all the while and waiting for her to issue what I've taken to calling a command. I don't think that sirens realize they do this, but once they're sure they've got you under their control, they start issuing little commands. Usually small ones just to test the waters. "Buy me another drink?" Chrissy asked at one point. I knew that was meant to be a command. So, I waved down the romance novel bartender and got her another beer. Small note, I've heard some people say that alcohol isn't good for sirens, but I've also seen plenty of them drink. I'm gonna need to ask an actual siren what the truth is. Let's switch to something heavier. Do you like whiskey? So on command, I ordered us 2 shots of whiskey. Looking at her from the corner of my eye, I could see her smiling a little. She thought she had me wrapped around her little finger. Good. That's what I wanted her to think. She asked for a couple more drinks over the next couple of minutes, but never really touched any of them. She'd take a sip, then leave it. Finally, she gave the most important command. "Want to get out of here?" she asked. That's what I've been waiting for. "We could go back to my place," I offered. "Nobody's home." I knew that'd be music to her ears. Step 3. Ambush them while they're alone. If you're just looking to avoid sirens, then you can use what I've taught you so far to help you with that. But if you're looking to hunt them, then this section is for you. I left the bar with Christy and started walking back to mine and Graham's motel room. She had her arm around me and was being all flirty, running her hands along my arms and occasionally planting little kisses on my cheeks and neck while she peppered me with little compliments. "You've got really nice arms. Do you work out?" "Yeah, I go to the gym sometimes, back at home." "Not from around here, huh?" "Nah, I'm a Wyoming boy." "Wyoming, huh? Never been. They got more boys like you in Wyoming?" "Yes, ma'am." She laughed. "Guess I gotta go and visit sometime." Looking back over my shoulder, I could see Graham following us at a distance. He knew what to do. I could see a baseball bat in his hands. Soon as Christy and I made it back to the motel room, he'd come charging in to put her down. Not fatally, obviously. A lot of monster hunters tend to go in for the kill, but Graham and I don't do it unless we have to. Good cops aren't supposed to kill suspected criminals, so we shouldn't either. We just subdue them and then call someone to take them away. There's this facility in Arizona they've got that takes in monster prisoners. I reckon that sending them there is better than killing them. As we reached the motel, I unlocked the door and let Chrissy inside. She sauntered in, looking back at me with heavy bedroom eyes and flashing me a "come and get me" grin. Hey, she wasn't my kind of girl, but I'm still just a man. If she wasn't a blood-sucking killer, I might have been obliged to take her up on that. But then there's step 4 to consider. Step 4. For the love of God, don't put your willy in them. I think this step is pretty self-explanatory. Fucking a siren's a good way to get bitten. I mentioned before that I've heard that biting apparently makes the sex better. The same has been said of vampires. I am not currently looking to find out for myself. Plus, I don't know what would happen if a man had a baby with a siren, and I do not want to know. So yeah, I did not fuck the fish lady. I did pretend like I was going to, though, letting her take me to the bed and kissing her like I was going to follow through. Graham came bursting through the door about a minute later, baseball bat in hand and a crazed look in his eye. I remember that Chrissy had just enough time to look up before BAM! Job well done! She went tumbling off the bed and onto the floor, gripping her head and snarling like a wild hellcat. I'd be bullshitting if I said the sight of it wasn't a little intimidating. But I was right there with Graham to take her down. We'd done this 1,000 times before. She lunged for him, and I grabbed her and held her down. He hit her with the bat to disorient her, and I got the handcuffs. This would normally be the end of it, but Chrissy had a little trick up her sleeve, one that neither of us had ever seen before. She started screaming. "Adam! Adam, it's a trap!" Graham and I sorta just looked at each other, wondering who the hell Adam was. Then we got our answer. The door to our hotel room had flown open, and the romance novel bartender stormed through, teeth bared and eyes set on us. I did tell you it was hard to recognize a siren if you weren't looking for one, and it turns out that Graham and I hadn't even noticed the one right in front of us. Step 5. If you run into a male siren, fight like hell. Male sirens are difficult. Here's a little lesson on siren culture for you. They tend to live in all-female communities. Why all-female? Because male sirens are difficult. They aren't as common to find as the females, and they usually tend to be more aggressive. They don't stay in the communities partially so that they can wander and keep the gene pool of several different communities diverse, and partially because if one does stay in one place for too long, the damages start adding up. They're more likely to kill their prey or to behave in ways that are unnecessarily brutal. What this all means for guys like us is that if our work brings us into contact with a male siren, we're gonna be in for an ass whooping. When Adam charged into our motel room, the first thing he did was rip off his shirt. Why did he do this? I don't actually know. But that's what he did. He ripped it off and came charging at me at full speed, leaving a Dallas-sized dent in the drywall. Chrissy took the chance to start kicking and bucking and ended up knocking poor Graham off his feet, during which she tackled him to the ground. Now, I've never seen a male and female siren working together like this, so naturally it caught us a little off guard. But Graham and I aren't chumps. We come prepared for this shit. Mostly. Adam had pulled me out of the drywall before slamming me back into it again. He ended up putting me through the wall completely and sending half of me into the bathroom. Then, of course, he pulled me out a second time and threw me across the room to mix things up a little. Through my blurry vision and the overwhelming terror of death that I currently felt, I could see Chrissy and Graham slapping and clawing at each other beside the bed. I saw him grab the lamp off the bedside table and break it over her head, before kicking her into the wall and leaving another dent. At this point, why the hell not? We already weren't getting the deposit on the room back. I tried to get to my feet when Adam grabbed me again and slammed one big meaty fist into my face. This fist? Hoo boy. That was a knuckle sandwich with double the meat, my friends. And I don't care how homoerotic that sounds because there's no other way I could possibly describe this. My ears were ringing after that punch to the jaw, and I hit the ground hard only to get picked up again and thrown out the door onto my face. Before I was hurled out of the hotel room, I could see Chrissy on Graham's back with her teeth sank into his shoulder. He'd somehow tied the cord of the broken lamp around her neck and was trying to strangle her, although God only knew if it was working or not. Since Graham was busy and not coming to save my ass, I picked myself up off the asphalt and took a fighting stance as Adam stepped out toward me. I got off one punch that hit him in the jaw. I'm not sure who that punch hurt more, me or him. I'm no slouch. I'm no pushover. I'm a reasonably tough guy, but Adam was big. He threw another haymaker at me, but I was kinda expecting that one and was able to duck it. My next punch went for his throat and managed to wind him just for a bit. He took a step back and I could see the gills on his ribs flaring. That gave me an idea. Step 6. Don't be afraid to improvise. I'm not a fan of fighting dirty, but when up against a 6'5" behemoth of a siren who's probably 90% solid muscle, you gotta do what you gotta do. So, I fought dirty. And I don't just mean dirty, I mean filthy. While he was reeling from that punch to the throat, I charged him and stuck my fingers into his gills. I've never actually done this before, so I didn't know if it was gonna work or not. But judging by the sound Adam made, it hurt like a son of a bitch. He screamed and drove his elbow into my skull hard enough to make me see stars. And I didn't let go. I threw my weight against him, sending us both toppling to the ground. His head slammed hard against the pavement. I took the chance to get on top of him and punched as hard as I could. It turns out this was not a good idea the second time, and I actually broke my hand doing this. So, for future reference, do not punch a 6'5" muscle-bound colossus in the face. Just don't do it, it's not worth it. Adam grabbed for my throat, squeezing as hard as he could, and I could see his mouth opening, revealing those razor-sharp, pearly whites of his. I looked up into the motel room to see Graham standing over Chrissy as he choked her with the cord. He threw a few violent punches to keep her down, before looking at me to see how I was doing. When he saw I wasn't doing well, he came running, broken lamp cord still in hand to loop it around Adam's throat. When that big lug realized he was being choked out, he started trying to fight off Graham, but I kept his arms busy. I grabbed one of them, using my weight to pin it down, while Graham threw his weight onto the other one. Adam was pinned, and even though he struggled, it didn't do him a look of good. Graham pulled the cable tighter and tighter around his throat, and the struggle slowly got weaker and weaker. As he slipped into unconsciousness, I got up stumbling a little, to run back into the motel and get the handcuffs. Chrissy laid winded on the ground, her face covered in blood, but she looked unharmed otherwise. She didn't try to stop me as I got the handcuffs, and when I cuffed her first, she just rolled over and let me do it. I didn't even think she realized what was going on. Graham had really kicked the shit out of the poor girl. Adam was still out when I brought the cuffs to him. We needed to use some of the stronger ones we had, but they held just fine. The police had shown up to investigate the disturbance about 10 minutes later. We flashed our badges, explained that these two were under investigation, showed our warrant, and called in a pickup for the two Sirens. Aside from some minor damage, neither of them were seriously injured. Last I heard, they got shipped off to Ashurst, so I hope they enjoy that Arizona weather. Graham and I, on the other hand, had taken a hell of a beating and needed a few days to recover. Either way, the job was done, and it was done right. So there's our guide to hunting Sirens. I hope that somewhere in this big wide world of ours, someone got something out of it. If not, well, we've got other monster hunting stories. Graham and I have been doing this for a while, and I've got a good feeling we'll be doing this for a long time to come. Nothing's ever gonna tear us apart.